Hello and welcome to our special live coverage of Pope Francis's speech at the United Nations headquarters. I'm Daniel Che. It's the largest assembly in the 70-year history of the UN. This comes after he made history by being the first pontiff to address the U.S. Congress. That was a very emotion-charged speech that touched all who listened. But some experts predict his speech at the UN could take a more forceful tone. As you can see, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon is addressing the UN General Assembly, and of course he exchanged some pleasantries, and we understand there will be some gift exchanges in the future, in not so distant future, that is, during this session. And we understand that the pontiff will deliver a message on climate change, social justice, helping the less fortunate, of course. And possibly the migrant crisis might be mentioned again, as he said he too was also a migrant.
But in selfies with young people. Like the United Nations, you are driven by a passion to help others. Your views move millions. Your teachings bring action. Your example inspires us all. Your visit today coincides with the adoption of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. But that is no coincidence. You have often spoken of an integral ecology, one that encompasses the environment, economic growth, social justice, and human well-being. In other words, sustainable development for our common home. The recent papal encyclical Laudato Si defined the climate change as a principal challenge facing humanity and the moral issue. This message is critical as we approach the pivotal climate change conference in Paris in December. Across the global agenda, His Holiness is a resounding voice of conscience. He has cried out for compassion for the world's refugees and migrants and solidarity with the people trapped in conflict and poverty. He is committed to lifting up struggling families and shutting down modern-day. He believes in building opportunity for young people and bridges between communities. In May 2014, Pope Francis met with the full leadership of the United Nations system at the Vatican. He affirmed that we must mobilize the world beyond religious or political differences to forge a shared vision, a life of dignity for all. On the first page of his recent encyclical, Pope Francis said, I quote, "I wish to address every person living on the planet," end quote. Holiness, welcome to the pulpit of the world. We are here to listen. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much.
I thank the Secretary General for his statement, and on behalf of the General Assembly, I once again wholeheartedly welcome His Holiness Pope Francis to this hall, and I invite him to address the General Assembly.
Señor Presidente,
Mr. President,
señoras,
ladies
señores,
and gentlemen,
buenos días.
good morning.
Una vez más,
once again, following a tradition by which I feel honored, the Secretary General of the United Nations has invited the Pope to address this distinguished assembly of nations. In my own name and that of the entire Catholic community, I wish to express to you, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, my heartfelt gratitude. And I'd like to thank you for your kind words. I greet also the heads of state and heads of government present, as well as the ambassadors, diplomats, and political and technical officials accompanying them, the personnel of the United Nations engaged in this, the 70th session of the General Assembly, the personnel of the various programs and agencies of the United Nations family, and all those who, in one way or another, take part in this meeting. And through you, I also greet the citizens of all the nations represented in this hall. I thank you, each and all of you, for your efforts in the service of mankind. This is the fifth time that a Pope has visited the United Nations. I follow in the footsteps of my predecessors, Pope Paul VI in 1965, Pope John Paul II in 1979 and 1995, and my most recent predecessor, now Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, in 2008. All of them express their great esteem for the organization, which they considered the appropriate juridical and political response to this present moment of history, marked by our technical ability to overcome distances and frontiers, and apparently to overcome all natural limits to the exercise of power. An essential response, inasmuch as technological power in the hands of nationalistic or falsely universalist ideologies, is capable of perpetrating tremendous atrocities. I can only reiterate the appreciation expressed by my predecessors in reaffirming the importance which the Catholic Church attaches to this institution and the hope which she places in its activities. The history of this organized community of states, represented by the United Nations, which is presently celebrating its 70th anniversary, is one of important common achievements over a period of unusually fast-paced changes. Without claiming to be exhaustive, we can mention the codification and development of international law, the establishment of international norms regarding human rights, advances in humanitarian law, the resolution of numerous conflicts, operations of peacekeeping and reconciliation, and any number of other accomplishments in every area of international activity and endeavor. Now, all these achievements are lights which help to dispel the darkness of the disorder caused by unrestrained ambitions and collective forms of selfishness. Certainly, many grave problems remain to be resolved. Yet, it is clear that without all those interventions on the international level, mankind would not have been able to survive the unchecked use of its own possibilities. Every one of these political, juridical and technical advances is a path towards attaining the ideal of human fraternity and a means for its greater realization. So for this reason I pay homage to all those men and women whose loyalty and self-sacrifice have benefited humanity as a whole over these past 70 years. In particular, today I would like to recall those who have given their lives for peace and reconciliation among peoples, from Dag Hammarskjöld to the many United Nations officials at every level who have been killed in the course of humanitarian missions and missions of peace and reconciliation. The experience of the past 70 years, beyond all these achievements, has made it clear that reform and adaptation to the times is always necessary in the pursuit of the ultimate goal of granting all countries, without exception, a share in and a genuine and equitable influence on decision-making processes. The need for greater equity is especially true in the case of those bodies with effective executive capabilities, such as the Security Council, the financial agencies, and the groups or mechanisms which were specifically created to deal with economic crises. This will help to limit every kind of abuse or usury, especially where developing countries are concerned. The international financial agencies should care for the sustainable development of countries and should ensure that they are not subjective to oppressive lending systems which So the international financial agencies should care for the sustainable development of countries and should ensure that they are not subjective to oppressive lending systems which, far from promoting progress, subject people to mechanisms which generate greater poverty, exclusion and dependence. The work of the United Nations, according to the principles set forth in the preamble and the first articles of its founding charter, can be seen as the development and promotion of the rule of law, based on the realization that justice is an essential condition for achieving the ideal of universal fraternity. In this context, it is helpful to recall that the limitation of power is an idea implicit in the concept of law itself. To give to each his own, to cite the classic definition of justice, means that no human individual or group can consider itself absolute, permitted to bypass the dignity and the rights of other individuals or their social groupings. The effective distribution of power, political, economic, defense-related, technological, etc., among a plurality of subjects and the creation of a juridical system for regulating claims and interests are one concrete way of limiting power. Yet today's world presents us with many false rights and at the same time broad sectors which are vulnerable, victims of power that is badly exercised. The natural environment and the vast ranks of men and women who are excluded. These are sectors closely interconnected and made increasingly fragile by the dominant political and economic relationships. That is why their rights must be forcefully affirmed by working to protect the environment and by putting an end to exclusion. First, it must be stated that a true right of the environment does exist, and for two reasons. First, because we human beings are part of the environment, we live in communion with it, since the environment itself entails ethical limits which human activity must acknowledge and respect. Man, for all his remarkable gifts, which are signs of a uniqueness which transcends the spheres of physics and biology, is, at the same time, a part of these spheres. He possesses a body shaped by physical, chemical, and biological elements, and can only survive and develop if the ecological environment is favorable. Any harm done to the environment, therefore, is harm to humanity. Second, because every creature, particularly a living creature, has an intrinsic value in its existence, its life, its beauty, and its interdependence with other creatures. We Christians, together with the other monotheistic religions, believe that the universe is the fruit of a loving decision by the Creator, who permits man respectfully to use creation for the good of his fellow man and for the glory of the Creator. But he is not authorized to abuse it, and much less is he authorized to destroy it. In all religions, the environment is a fundamental good. The misuse and destruction of the environment are also accompanied by a relentless process of exclusion. In effect, a selfish and boundless thirst for power and material prosperity leads both to the misuse of available natural resources and to the exclusion of the weak and the disadvantaged, either because they are differently abled, handicapped, or because they lack adequate information and technical expertise, or are incapable of decisive political action. Economic and social exclusion is a complete denial of human fraternity and a very grave offense against human rights and the environment. And the poorest are those who suffer most from such offences for three serious reasons. They are cast off by society, forced to live of what is discarded, and suffer unjustly from the consequences of the abuse of the environment. These phenomena are part of today's widespread and quietly growing culture of waste. The dramatic reality, this whole situation of exclusion and inequality with its evident effects, has led me, in union with the entire Christian people and many others, to take stock also of my grave responsibility in this regard, and therefore to speak out together with all those who are seeking urgently needed and effective solutions. The adoption of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development at the World Summit, which opens today, is an important sign of hope. I am similarly confident that the Paris Conference on Climatic Change will secure fundamental and effective agreements. Now, solemn commitments, however, are not enough, even though they are a necessary step towards solutions. The classic definition of justice, which I mentioned earlier, contains, as one of its essential elements, a constant and perpetual will. Justitia est constans et perpetua voluntas jus sum quique tribuendi. Our world demands of all government leaders a will which is effective, practical, constant, with concrete steps and immediate measures for preserving and improving the natural environment, and thus putting an end as quickly as possible to the phenomenon of social and economic exclusion, with its painful consequences of human trafficking, the marketing of human organs and tissues, sexual exploitation of boys and girls, slave labor, including prostitution, the drug and weapons trade, terrorism, and international organized crime. Such is the magnitude of these situations and their toll in innocent lives that we must avoid every temptation to fall into a declarationist nominalism, which would just assuage our own consciences. We need to ensure that our institutions are truly effective in the struggle against all these scourges. The number and complexity of the problems require that we possess technical instruments of verification, but this involves two risks. We can rest content with the bureaucratic exercise of drawing up long lists of good proposals, goals, objectives, and statistical indicators, or we can think that a single theoretical and a priori solution will provide an answer to all these challenges. It must never be forgotten that political and economic activity is only effective when it is understood as a prudential activity, guided by a perennial concept of justice and consciously conscious of the fact that above and beyond our plans and programs, we are dealing with real men and women who live, struggle and suffer, and are often forced to live in great poverty and deprived of all rights. To enable these real men and women to escape from extreme poverty, we must allow them to be dignified agents of their own destiny. Integral human development and the full exercise of human dignity cannot be imposed. They must be built up and allowed to unfold for each individual, for every family, in communion with others, and in a right relationship with all those areas in which human social life develops: friends, communities, towns, cities, schools, businesses, unions, provinces and nations. Now, this proposes the right to education, also for girls, who are excluded in certain places. The right to education, which is ensured first and foremost by respecting and reinforcing the primary right of the family to educate its children, as well as the right of churches and social groups to support and assist families in the education of their boys and girls. Education conceived in this way is the basis for the implementation of the 2030 agenda and for reclaiming the environment. At the same time, government leaders must do everything possible to ensure that all can have the minimum spiritual and material means needed to live in dignity and to create and support a family, which is the primary cell of any social development. In practical terms, this absolute minimum has three names: lodging, labor, and land. And one spiritual name: spiritual freedom, which includes religious freedom, the right to education, and all other civil rights. Now, for all this, the simplest and best measure and indicator of the implementation of the new agenda for development will be effective, practical, and immediate access on the part of all to essential material and spiritual goods: housing, dignified and properly remunerated employment, adequate food and drinking water, religious freedom, and more generally, spiritual freedom and education. Now, these pillars of integral human development have a common foundation, and this is the right to life and, more generally, what we could call the right to existence of human nature itself. The ecological crisis, together with the large-scale destruction of biodiversity, can threaten the very existence of the human species. The baneful consequences of an irresponsible mismanagement of the global economy, guided only by the ambition for wealth and power, must serve as a summons to a forthright reflection on man. Man is not only a freedom which he creates for himself. Man does not create himself. He is spirit and will, but also nature. Creation is compromised, where we ourselves have the final word. The misuse of creation begins when we no longer recognize any instance above ourselves, when we see nothing else but ourselves. Consequently, the defense of the environment and the fight against exclusion demand that we recognize a moral law written into human nature itself, one which includes the natural difference between man and woman and the absolute respect for life in all its stages and dimensions. Without the recognition of certain incontestable natural ethical limits, and without the immediate implementation of those pillars of integral human development, the ideal of saving succeeding generations from the scourge of war and of promoting social progress and better standards of life in larger freedom risks becoming an unattainable illusion, or even worse, just idle chatter, which serves as a cover for all kinds of abuse and corruption, or for carrying out an ideological colonization by the imposition of anomalous models and lifestyles which are alien to people's identity and, in the end, are irresponsible. War is the negation of all rights, and it's a dramatic assault on the environment. If we want true, integral human development for all, we must work tirelessly to avoid war between nations and between peoples. To this end, there is a need to ensure the uncontested rule of law and tireless recourse to negotiation, mediation and arbitration as proposed by the Charter of the United Nations, which constitutes truly a fundamental juridical norm. The experience of these 70 years since the founding of the United Nations in general, and in particular the experience of these first 15 years of the third millennium, reveal both the effectiveness of the full application of international norms and the ineffectiveness of their lack of enforcement. When the Charter of the United Nations is respected and applied with transparency and sincerity and without ulterior motives as an obligatory reference point of justice, and not as a means for masking spurious intentions, peaceful results will be attained. When, on the other hand, the norm is considered simply as an instrument to be used whenever it proves favorable, and then to be avoided when it is not, a true Pandora's box is opened, releasing uncontrollable forces which gravely harm defenseless populations, the cultural milieu, and even the biological environment. The preamble and the first article of the Charter of the United Nations set forth the foundations of the international juridical framework. Peace, the pacific solution of disputes, and the development of friendly relations between nations. Now, strongly opposed to such statements, and in practice denying them, is the constant tendency to the proliferation of arms, especially weapons of mass destruction, such as nuclear weapons. An ethics and a law based on the threat of mutual destruction and possibly the destruction of all mankind are self-contradictory and represent an affront to the entire framework of the United Nations, which would end up as a nations united by fear and distrust. There is urgent need to work for a world free of nuclear weapons, in full application of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, in letter and spirit, towards the goal of a complete prohibition of these weapons. The recent agreement reached on the nuclear question in a sensitive region of Asia and the Middle East is proof of the potential of political goodwill and of law exercised with sincerity, patience and constancy. I express my hope that this agreement will be lasting and efficacious and bring forth the desired fruits with the cooperation of all the parties involved. In this sense, hard evidence is not lacking of the negative effects of military and political interventions which are not coordinated between members of the international community. For this reason, while regretting to have to do so, I must renew my repeated appeals regarding the painful situation of the entire Middle East, North Africa, and other African countries, where Christians, together with other cultural or ethnic groups, and even members of the majority religion who have no desire to be caught up in hatred and folly, have been forced to witness the destruction of the places of worship, their cultural and religious heritage, their houses and property, and have faced the alternative either of fleeing or of paying for their adhesion to good and to peace by their own lives or by enslavement. These realities should serve as a grave summons to an examination of conscience on the part of those charged with the conduct of international affairs. And not only in cases of religious or cultural persecution, but in every situation of conflict, as in Ukraine, Syria, Iraq, Libya, South Sudan, and the Great Lakes region. Real human beings take precedence over partisan interests, however legitimate the latter may be. In wars and conflicts, there are individual persons, our brothers and sisters, men and women, young and old, boys and girls, who weep, suffer and die. Human beings who are easily discarded when our only response is to draw up lists of problems, strategies, and disagreements. As I wrote in my letter to the Secretary General of the United Nations on the 9th of August 2014, the most basic understanding of human dignity compels the international community, particularly through the norms and mechanisms of international law, to do all that it can to stop and to prevent further systematic violence against ethnic and religious minorities, and to protect innocent peoples. Along the same lines, I would mention another kind of conflict, which is not always so open, yet is silently killing millions of people. another kind of war experienced by many of our societies as a result of the narcotics trade. A war which is taken for granted but poorly fought. Drug trafficking is, by its very nature, accompanied by trafficking in persons, money laundering, the arms trade, child exploitation, and other forms of corruption. A corruption which has penetrated to the different levels of social, political, military, artistic, and religious life, and in many cases has given rise to a parallel structure which threatens the credibility of our institutions. I began this speech recalling the visits of my predecessors. And now I would hope that my words will be taken above all as a continuation of the final words of the address of Pope Paul VI, spoken almost exactly 50 years ago, but they remain ever timely. And I quote, "The hour has come when a pause, a moment of recollection, reflection, even of prayer, is absolutely needed so that we may think back over our common origin, our history, our common destiny. The appeal to the moral conscience of man has never been as necessary as it is today. For the danger comes neither from progress nor from science. If these are used well, they can help to solve a great number of the serious problems besetting mankind. Among other things, human genius, well applied, will surely help to meet the great challenges of ecological deterioration and of exclusion." And I continue in quoting Pope Paul VI, "The real danger comes from man, who has at his disposal ever more powerful instruments that are as well fitted to bring about ruin as they are to achieve lofty conquests." That is what Pope Paul VI said. The common home of all men must continue to rise on the foundations of a right understanding of universal fraternity and respect for the sacredness of every human life, of every man and every woman, the poor, the elderly, children, the infirm, the unborn, the unemployed, the abandoned, and those considered disposable because they are only considered as part of one or other statistic. This common home of all men and women must also be built on the understanding of a certain sacredness of created nature. Now, such understanding and respect call for a higher degree of wisdom, one which accepts transcendence, and at the same time rejects the creation of an all-powerful elite, and recognizes that the full meaning of individual and collective life is found in the selfless service to others, and in the sage and respectful use of creation for the common good. To repeat the words of Pope Paul VI, the edifice of modern civilization has to be built on spiritual principles, for they are the only ones capable not only of supporting it, but also of shedding light on it. El Gaucho Martín Fierro, a classic of literature in my native land, sings, "Brothers should stand by each other because this is the first law. Keep a true bond between you always, at every time, because if you fight amongst yourselves, you'll be devoured by those outside." The contemporary world, so apparently connected, is experiencing a growing and steady social fragmentation, which places at risk the foundations of social life, and consequently leads to battles between ourselves to defend our conflicting interests. The present time invites us to give priority to actions which generate new processes in society, so as to bear fruit in significant and positive historical events. We cannot permit ourselves to postpone certain agendas for the future. The future demands of us critical and global decisions in the face of worldwide conflicts which increase the number of the excluded and those in need. The praiseworthy international juridical framework of the United Nations Organization and of all its activities, like any other human endeavor, can be improved, yet it remains necessary. At the same time, it can be the pledge of a secure and happy future for future generations. And so it will if the representatives of the states can set aside partisan and ideological interests and sincerely strive to serve the common good. I pray to Almighty God that this will be the case, and I assure you of my support and my prayers and the support and prayers of all the faithful of the Catholic Church, that this institution, all its member states, and each of its officials will always render an effective service to mankind, a service respectful of diversity and capable of bringing about, for the sake of our common good, the best in each people and in every individual. Upon all of you, may God bless you all.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to express, as already has been done with the hands, our deep appreciation to His Holiness Pope Francis for this very important statement, a statement for the reflection and inspiration for all of us. I request representatives to be kind enough to remain at their seats while we accompany His Holiness out of the General Assembly Hall. The summit for the adoption of the post-2015 development agenda will begin shortly. In the interim period, immediately following the adjournment of this meeting, I invite representatives to remain seated and view the special performances and presentations on the occasion of the convening of the summit. The meeting is adjourned.
Now, there's a reason why the turnout at the UN Assembly is so historically large today. The 78-year-old man demands attention. One man can make a difference, apparently judging by what he has accomplished today. He managed to touch on a number of topics, so many different topics. And of course, he pointed out the importance of looking back at the selfishness of mankind and, of course, selflessness as well, and the importance to remember, learn from it, and move forward as one. Papa Francisco, he touched on many topics, but he's a celebrity that refuses to be celebrated. He is a non-political figure whose actions revitalize and influence political and diplomatic circles all around the world. He is most importantly a religious leader who he believes that you don't have to believe to receive. Well, that brings us to the end of our live coverage of Pope Francis's address to the UN. We will have our regularly scheduled newscast later on. Do join us then. Well, we do have some more time left, apparently, on our special coverage, and we are looking at the UN headquarters after Pope Francis delivered a historic speech, and we will have a very exciting lineup of program scheduled at the UN headquarters for this Sustainable Development Summit. We just finished the opening ceremony, and of course, the Pope delivered a speech, and never a one-sided applause when he is out there speaking from his heart. We will be expecting a film screening, The Earth from Space, first, followed by performance by UN Goodwill Ambassador Shakira, and performance by UN Goodwill Ambassador Angelique Kidjo as well, and Nobel laureate Malala Yousafzai, and 193 youths will talk about a call to action. And we will also have a film screening, Under One Sky, and this is the opening session of UN Sustainable Development Summit that we are providing to you live from the event venue in the United States, UN headquarters. and that's Pope Francis meeting UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. They've had a little meet and greet session, and of course they've had some more in-depth discussions and exchange of gifts as well. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon started the event with a welcoming speech covering Pope Francis's various characters and what he has accomplished so far and what we can look forward to from him. And there they are exchanging signatures, and Pope Francis, of course, leaving his John Hancock there. This is a very important moment for the UN as well as for the Catholic community. But Pope Francis is, of course, not just a simple mere religious leader. He is one of the most open popes that we have seen in decades. He is called the People's Pope for a reason. There he is receiving a warm reception. We understand that many of the people at the UN try to have not just seats, but a place to stand to witness this historic moment for themselves. And you see them, of course, waving their cell phones in the air.
To protect. People will go to extraordinary lengths to preserve their home. People love their homes. And if they don't feel that they have a home, they'll risk everything to find one. The further we find ourselves from home, the more we miss it. It's a question of perspective.
Of course, one of the most disturbing and very important issue right now is various issues around the world is, of course, we showed some clips of the migrant situation, and now we're looking at a very impressive clip from NASA.
The earth was small, flat, blue, and so touchingly alone. Our home that must be defended like a holy relic.
When you're finally up at the moon, looking back on Earth, all those differences and nationalistic traits are pretty well going to blend, and you're going to get a concept that maybe this is one world. And why on earth can't we learn to live together like decent people?
On the first day up in space, we all pointed to our own countries. The third or fourth day, we were pointing to our continents. By the fifth day, we were aware of only one Earth.
We have this connection to Earth. I mean, it's our home.
Wherever we live, whatever language we speak or food we eat, the earth is our home. We have to take care of it. And we should look out for everyone else who lives there. That has got to be our goal. That's why we need goals.
Excellencies, please take your seats and welcome UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador, renowned singer and devoted advocate for children's rights, Shakira.
We live in a world in which many of those who are born poor will die poor. And it is up to us to be the first society to eradicate poverty and bring justice and equality to the most disenfranchised people on earth. Our children have the right to equal opportunities, to thrive, to be happy and healthy and safe. Now is the time to not just imagine, but do. This is for Aylan Kurdi and Galip Kurdi. Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us.
And of course, this is a very festive mood we're starting up right now at the very important summit, the UN Sustainable Development Summit. It's not just all about sitting down and exchanging ideas and discussions. It is also important, of course, for the Goodwill Ambassadors to set the right tone. We have the next UN Goodwill Ambassador, Angelique Kidjo, on stage.
Today is a day where we talk about Sustainable Development Goal. And we should talk about Sustainable Development Goal every day, every second, every moment, until we put an end to poverty, until we put our children to school, our young girls to school, and empower boys, men and women all around the world, especially in my continent. We need to do this, and together I think we can achieve a world that is better for the future generation, because that's the only solution to preserve the earth and to preserve the economic system that we have. So today, I'm going to ask you, I know that is a big ask, but let's celebrate African way, the success to come, the success of a better world for the next generation that we are here for today. So when I ask you to sing, you go along with me. Thank you. Let's celebrate. Ashe mama, mama Africa. Oh, mama Africa. Oh, mama Africa. Oh, Baba Shile, Baba Yanu, Baba Pirira. Ashe mama, Africa, 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 Africa. Africa, Mama Africa, Mama Africa. Oh, 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 Ashe Mama Africa, Ashe Mama Africa, Ashe Mama Africa, Ashe Mama Africa. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Please welcome Nobel Peace Prize laureate and activist for girls' empowerment, Malala Yousafzai.
And that's Nobel laureate Malala Yousafzai and 193 youths for a call to action. Let's hear what they have to say.
In the name of God, the most beneficent, the most merciful. Before I start, I would like this environment to be a bit quiet and that people pay full attention to what the youth is asking here. Dear sisters and brothers, world leader sitting there, look up because the future generation is raising their voice. Today, we are 193 young people representing billions more. Each lantern we hold represents the hope we have for our future because of the commitments you have made to the global goals. In my life, I have experienced terrorism, displacement, and denial from education. And these are the tragedies that millions of children are still suffering. That shocking and heartbreaking image of Elan Kurdi lying dead on a seashore. The parents of the girls abducted by Boko Haram. Tears flooding from their eyes. And little children on the Syrian border with no home, no hope. Force us to ask, how many more will we see being killed, being rejected, being neglected, and being homeless in society? How many more? The world needs a change. It cannot change itself. It's me, it's you, it's all of us who have to bring that change. Education is not a privilege. Education is a right. Education is peace. Dear world leaders, dear brothers and sisters, promise to all children in Pakistan, in India, in Syria, and across the world, promise them peace, promise them prosperity, promise an education. To my brave sister Salam, promise an education to my brave sister Salam and all refugee children, that wars cannot stop them from learning. Promise my sister Amina that our sisters abducted by Boko Haram will be brought back, that girls will be able to study in safety. Promise us that you will keep your commitments and invest in our future. Promise that every child will have the right to safe, free, and quality primary and secondary education. This is the real investment that the world needs and that the world leaders should do. I'm hopeful that we all and the United Nations will be united in the goal of education and peace, and that we will make this world not just a better place, but the best place to live. Education is hope. Education is peace. Thank you so much.
Speech from Malala Yousafzai, and of Course 193 use, and now we move on to a special film screening. The title is Under One Sky. Take a look.
Excellencies, please remain seated for the formal opening of the summit for the adoption of the post-2015 development agenda.
The fourth plenary meeting of the General Assembly is called to order. I declare open the United Nations Summit for the adaptation of the post-2015 development agenda. This high-level plenary meeting of the General Assembly is held in accordance with Assembly Resolution 65/1 of 22 September 2010, 68/6 of 9 October 2013, and 69/244 of 29 December 2014, and Decision 69/557 of 5 March 2015, and under Agenda Item 15, integrated and coordinated implementation of and follow-up to the outcomes of the major United Nations Conference and summits in the economic, social and related fields, and Agenda Item 116, follow-up to the outcome of the Millennium Summit. The General Assembly has before it a draft resolution issued as document A/70/L1 entitled Transforming Our World, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development.
Your Excellencies, I now give the floor to His Excellency Rasmussen, the Prime Minister of Denmark and the co-chairperson of the high-level plenary meeting.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor, together with His Excellency Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, the President of the Republic of Uganda, to welcome you all to this historic summit for the adoption of the new 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The presence of so many leaders is a testament to the importance and transformative potential for this new agenda. When world leaders came together here in New York 15 years ago, they came with one pivotal vision: to reduce poverty in the world. But equally important, they came with concrete and ambitious goals, and they came with a fixed deadline. 15 years later, we are gathered again here in New York. What has happened in those 15 years? The short answer is a lot. 1 billion people have been lifted out of extreme poverty. More girls than ever before go to school. More than 90% of the global population now have access to an improved source of drinking water. The mortality rate of children under 5 has declined by more than half. And these are not just numbers. Behind each of these figures, we know that the lives of millions of children have improved. So we have indeed come a long way. The Millennium Development Goals showed us that setting targets works, that working together is the right way forward.
But the work is not done yet. Today, we begin a new journey. A journey that builds on the success of the Millennium Development Goals, but it also goes much further. We are gathered today to adopt the Sustainable Development Goals. Today, each of us not only commits our nation to new far-sighted visions, but also to new concrete and realistic goals and a fixed deadline. Our leadership and direction is needed. We must make sure that we live up to our firm and collective commitments. And Denmark, I can assure you, is ready to do its part. We will continue our efforts to eradicate poverty, to create decent jobs, and to increase sustainable economic growth. Since 1978, we have, as a country, met the international target of providing 0.7% of GNI to official development assistance to create better lives for all. And I strongly urge many more countries to meet this goal. Denmark strongly supports global public-private partnerships that catalyze investments in developing countries and middle-income countries. We strive to combat diseases such as cancer and diabetes by promoting healthy lifestyles, strengthening our health systems, and fostering scientific research. We promote technologies in energy, climate change, and environment that make a green transition possible, also beyond our own country. Denmark will work for the full and equal participation of women, for their empowerment and for their human rights, and indeed for the human rights of all. I assure you, Denmark will continue these efforts with determination. I encourage everyone to do the same, so that 15 years from now, when world leaders will once again meet in New York, we will have met the goals we adopt here today. The new agenda has laid out our vision of where we believe the world should be in 2030. History will judge us and hold us accountable for achieving the results that we owe our children and their children. The Danish presidency of the 17th General Assembly will take the lead to implement the development agenda to make sure we turn our worlds into action. And with these words, ladies and gentlemen, I wish you all a successful summit. Thank you very much. And I now give the floor to His Excellency Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, President of the Republic of Uganda and co-chairperson of the high-level plenary meeting.
Your Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, Your Excellency Rasmussen, Prime Minister of Denmark and co-chair of the summit, the Secretary General, President of the General Assembly, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to co-chair this important summit as we gather as a community of nations to adopt a new development agenda that will guide our development efforts for the next 15 years. This historic summit is the culmination of months of tireless efforts and unprecedented commitment by member states and stakeholders to formulate a universal, inclusive, and transformative development agenda. I would like to pay tribute to His Excellency Sam Kutesa, our Foreign Minister, for his leadership and accomplishments as President of the 69th session of the General Assembly and thank all of you for supporting Uganda in that responsibility. I also congratulate and convey appreciation to the President of the 70th session, His Excellency Morgans, and the Secretary General, His Excellency Ban Ki-moon, for their leadership. Today heralds the dawn of a new era in our collective efforts towards eradicating poverty, improving livelihoods of people everywhere, transforming economies, and protecting our planet. Together, we are sending a powerful message to people in every village, every city, every nation worldwide that we are committed to taking bold steps to change their lives for the better. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which we will adopt today, is ambitious in its scope and breadth. In the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, the social, economic, and environmental dimensions of sustainable development are addressed in an integrated way. The agenda also carries forward the unfinished business of the Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs. Over the last 15 years, we have attained significant achievements through implementing the MDGs. Globally, more than 1 billion people have been lifted from extreme poverty, and improvements have been made in access to education, to health, water, and sanitation, advancing gender equality and women's empowerment. In Uganda, we have been able to reduce the percentage of people living in extreme poverty from 56% in 2000 to 19% today. We have also attained universal primary education, promoted gender equality and empowerment of women, and continue to reduce child and maternal mortality. From our experience, it has been clear that to sustainably achieve the MDGs, we must have social economic transformation. It is therefore refreshing that in the successor framework, the SDGs, key drivers of economic growth, have been duly identified and prioritized. These include infrastructure development, especially energy, transport, and ICT. It also includes industrialization and value addition, human resource development, that is through education and health, improving market access, and greater participation of the private sector. While the SDGs will be universally applicable, we also recognize national circumstances, different levels of development, and the needs of countries in special situations, particularly the least developed countries, LDCs, landlocked development countries, small island development states, and African countries. Taking urgent action to combat climate change and its severe impacts is also prioritized in the new agenda. We should redouble efforts towards reaching an ambitious legally binding agreement on climate change in Paris in November that promotes the achievement of sustainable development while protecting the planet. The new agenda also rightly underscores the important linkages between development, peace and security, and human rights. We have to intensify efforts to combat transnational crime, terrorism, and the rise of radicalization and violent extremism around the world. We should reject pseudo-ideologies that manipulate identity by promoting sectarianism of religion and communities and eclipse the legitimate interests of the people through investment and trade. Where identity issues are legitimate, they should be expeditiously handled. We should all be proud of what has been accomplished so far as we ushered in this new development agenda. However, the critical next step will be to ensure its successful implementation on the ground. In this context, integrating the SDGs into our respective national and regional development plans, mobilizing adequate financial resources, technology development and transfer, as well as capacity building will be critical. We have to ensure full implementation of the comprehensive framework for financing sustainable development, which we adopted in Addis Ababa Action Agenda, support achievement of the goals and targets of the Agenda 2030. One of the major challenges many developing countries continue to face is accessing affordable long-term financing for critical infrastructure projects. In this regard, it will be vital to promptly establish and operationalize the proposed new forum to bridge the infrastructure gap and complement existing initiatives and multilateral mechanisms to facilitate access to long-term financing at concessional and affordable rates. The efforts of developing countries to improve domestic resource mobilization, boost economic growth, and address major challenges such as unemployment should be supported by development partners as well as international financial institutions and regional development banks. We also need to do more to promote micro, small and medium enterprises, support entrepreneurship, especially for women and youth, and enhance the contribution of the private sector and other stakeholders to sustainable development. Through prioritization, the least developed countries themselves can also contribute to their own infrastructure development. In order to build effective, inclusive, and accountable institutions at all levels, we have to ensure that the voices of the developing countries and regions are heard and that they are treated as equal partners in multilateral decision-making. At the international level, we need urgent reform of the United Nations, particularly the Security Council and other multilateral institutions, to reflect the current geopolitical realities. We need a renewed global partnership for development in which all the commitments made, including on overseas development aid, ODA, trade and investments, are fulfilled. While the agenda represents the collective aspirations of all peoples, its success will hinge on its ability to reduce inequalities and improve the lives of the most vulnerable among us, including women, children, the elderly, and persons with disabilities. After months of intensive negotiations and steadfast commitment, we have before us an agenda that represents our best opportunity to transform our world. We have heard the voices of people spanning the globe, from eager children asking for access to a quality education, to young women seeking better maternal health care, from rural villagers whose farmlands have been ravaged by droughts to the coastal fishermen on small island states who fear their entire existence will soon be swallowed by the rising sea levels. We continue to witness the influx of refugees and migrants into Europe from Africa and the Middle East, which is partly caused by conflict and lack of economic opportunities. Those voices may speak many languages and dialects, but in the end, their message is the same. Please help us to live happier, more prosperous lives, while also protecting the planet for our children and grandchildren. After the adoption of this agenda, it is incumbent upon us all to take the development aspirations laid out in this document and turn them into reality on the ground for our people, our communities, and our nations to benefit from this agenda. This agenda will create global prosperity different from the past arrangements of prosperity for some through parasitism and misery and underdevelopment for the others. I thank you.
And I now give the floor to the Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Ban Ki-moon.
Esteemed co-chairs of this post-2015 summit, Their Excellencies President Museveni of Uganda and Prime Minister Rasmussen of Denmark, Their Excellencies, the Presidents of the General Assembly, His Excellency Mr. Likhatov and His Excellency Sam Kutesa, distinguished heads of state and government, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have reached a defining moment in human history. The people of the world have asked us to shine a light on a future of promise and opportunity. Member states have responded with 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The new agenda is a promise by leaders to all people everywhere. It's a universal, integrated, and transformative vision for a better world. It's an agenda for people to end poverty in all its forms, an agenda for the planet, our common home, an agenda for shared prosperity, peace, and partnership. It conveys the urgency of climate action. It is rooted in gender equality and respect for the rights of all. Above all, it pledges to leave no one behind. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the true test of commitment of Agenda 2030 will be implementation. We need action from everyone, everywhere. 17 Sustainable Development Goals are our guide. They are a to-do list for people and planet and the blueprint for success. To achieve these new global goals, we will need your high-level political commitment. We will need a renewed global partnership. The Millennium Development Goals showed what is possible when we work together. The Addis Ababa Agenda, Action Agenda, has given us a solid financing framework. Let us build on this foundation. To do better, we must do differently. The 2030 Agenda compels us to look beyond the national boundaries and short-term interests and act in solidarity for the long term. We can no longer afford to think and work in silos. Institutions will have to become fit for purpose and grant new purpose. The United Nations system is strongly committed to supporting member states in this great new endeavor. Mesdames et messieurs, nous devons entrer du bon pied dans l'ère nouvelle. Je demande à tous les gouvernements d'adopter à Paris, en décembre, un accord sur le climat qui soit solide et universel. Je constate avec satisfaction que plusieurs pays sont déjà en train d'intégrer le programme 2030 dans leur stratégie nationale de développement. Mais nul ne peut réussir seul. Tous les intéressés doivent être mobilisés comme pour l'élaboration du programme. Nous devons collaborer avec les parlements et les collectivités locales et travailler avec les villes comme avec les zones rurales. Nous devons mobiliser les entreprises et leurs dirigeants. Nous devons associer la société civile à nos politiques et lui donner la possibilité de nous demander des comptes. Nous devons écouter les scientifiques et les universitaires. Il nous faudra aussi nous lancer dans la révolution des données. Et surtout, nous devons nous mettre au travail tout de suite. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished heads of state and government, 70 years ago, the United Nations rose from the ashes of war. Governments agreed on a visionary charter dedicated to we the peoples. The agenda you are adopting today advances the goals of the charter. It embodies the aspirations of people everywhere for lives of peace, security, and dignity on a healthy planet. Let us today pledge to light the path to this transformative vision. I count on your strong leadership and commitment. I thank you very much. Merci.
I thank the Secretary General for his statement. In accordance with the General Assembly Resolution 69/244 of 29th December 2014, I now give the floor to Mr. Sarir Shetty, Secretary General of Amnesty International.
Thank you, Mr. President, Secretary General of the United Nations, world leaders. I speak today both on behalf of the global Amnesty International movement with more than 7 million members, activists, and also for many civil society organizations around the world. At the outset, I congratulate you for the remarkable progress the world has seen through the Millennium Development Goals. But increasingly, we hear the question, is our world spinning out of its axis? It can feel that way. Hundreds of millions of people still live in poverty. Too many people, particularly women and girls, routinely suffer violence and multiple human rights violations. Inequality, injustice, environmental destruction, and corruption are a toxic combination. There is declining trust in governments and big corporations, and young people across the world are rising in protest. Horrific conflicts are destroying communities and countries and have fueled the largest global refugee crisis since the Second World War. The appalling story of the 3-year-old Syrian child, Alan Kurdi, whose dead body on the beach shocked the world, sums it up. We cannot hide the reality of the world we live in. And then there is the world we want, the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, we can't blame people for being skeptical when they see yet another summit declaration. There is a huge gap between the world we live in and the world we want. But these goals represent people's aspirations and rights, and they must and can be realized. So I suggest 4 practical tests to realize the goals and prove the skeptics wrong. First, the ownership test. The key to success is for poor and marginalized people to be primary decision makers at every stage. The goals must be resourced and integrated in national and local plans and budgets, and they must be implemented in line with the state's existing human rights obligations. Second, the accountability test. People should know exactly what governments have promised and what they have delivered, the right to information. And if governments don't deliver, people should be able to hold them to account through independent mechanisms. It is not enough anymore for governments to say that they are legitimate because they were elected or they have a mandate. They have to be accountable to the people directly on an ongoing basis. Third, the non-discrimination test. Let us be clear. Leaving no one behind means challenging power structures and enforcing the rule of law. Inequality is largely the direct result of discrimination and exclusion based on gender, race, descent, religion, or other status. Inequality is the consequence of the failure to protect the rights of the marginalized, indigenous peoples, minorities, migrants, persons with disabilities, children, and the elderly. Fourth, the coherence test. We are all aware of countries which performed very well on the Millennium Development Goals, but outrage against persistent human rights violations led to revolutions. Why? Because people's lives are not divided into development, environment, peace, and human rights. Only bureaucracies are. So coherence and consistency is essential. You cannot claim to support sustainable development when you are reluctant to reduce the consumption of the rich or transfer technology. You cannot preach about human rights while practicing mass surveillance. You cannot lecture about peace while being the world's largest manufacturer of arms. You cannot allow your corporations to use financial and tax loopholes while railing against corruption. You cannot adopt the Sustainable Development Goals and at the same time attack and arrest peaceful protesters and dissenters. You cannot launch these goals and in parallel deny a safe and legal route to refugees, a life with dignity. Esteemed leaders, the Sustainable Development Goals present a compass for decent jobs, for justice, for humanity. As civil society, we will stand with the poor and marginalized at all costs, and we will hold governments and businesses to account. Last night in New York, but yesterday in many parts of the world, thousands of people marched for the goals to light the way. They called for authentic leadership from you, leadership with integrity, leadership from the heart. I know that you can live up to their hopes. Thank you. Namaste.
I thank Mr. Shetty for his statement.
The Assembly will now turn to draft resolution A/70/L1 entitled Transforming Our World, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The Assembly will now take a decision on draft resolution A/70/L1 entitled Transforming Our World, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. In this connection, I would like to draw the Assembly's attention to the note by the Secretariat regarding program budgetary implications contained in document A/70/391. Accordingly, the Fifth Committee will examine during the main part of the session the revised estimate arising from the draft resolution. May I take it that the Assembly wishes to adopt draft resolution A/70/L1? It is so decided.
That's great.
Congratulations.
Listen please. Before we begin the list of speakers, I would like to turn to some organizational matters pertaining to the conduct of the plenary meeting of the summit. Length of statements. I would like to remind members that in accordance with Resolution 69/244 of 29th December 1914, the list of speakers was created on the basis that statements would have a time limit of up to 5 minutes per statement. In light of that given time frame, I would like to appeal to speakers to deliver their statements at a reasonable pace so that interpretation into the 6 official United Nations languages may be provided properly. To assist speakers in managing their time, a light system has been installed at the speaker's rostrum. May I appeal to all distinguished speakers for their cooperation in observing the time limits of their statements, so that all those inscribed on the list of speakers for a given meeting will be heard at that meeting. expressing congratulations. Finally, in order to avoid disruption for the next speaker, I would like to seek the cooperation of the distinguished delegates to remain in their seats after a statement has been delivered. In this connection, I would like to invite speakers, after delivering their statements, to exit the General Assembly Hall through room General Assembly 200, located behind the podium, before returning to their seats.
The Assembly will now hear an address by Her Excellency Kolinda Grabar-Kitarović, President of the Republic of Croatia.
Your Excellencies, distinguished co-chairs, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I feel privileged and proud to be the first among many speakers that will, in the next 3 days, mark the end of our momentous preparatory work on the Sustainable Development Goals. Our meeting, one of the biggest ever in history of international relations, will also be a historical beginning, a milestone for mankind. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals in front of us are not just another chapter in the United Nations bureaucratic procedure. It is not just another tome in the endless archives of this organization. It is the blueprint for our development for the next 15 years and beyond, a framework and tool for our better future. Transforming our world, this is not a phrase. This is an obligation for all of us. I want to express Croatia's gratitude to the Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, and the President of the 69th General Assembly, Sam Kutesa, for their exceptional efforts and leadership in the preparatory process of the post-2015 agenda. The tribute for this remarkable achievement goes to many hard-working people, but above all, it goes to 193 member states of the United Nations who worked together tirelessly and reached unprecedented consensus about the goals and means for our future development. Some will say that we have too many goals and targets. I must disagree with that. Our declaration states that this is a far-reaching and people-centered agenda. This means that no one is left behind. Neither the landlocked countries nor the small islands perilously exposed to the hazards of climate change. Neither those who are in dire need of water nor those who have too much of it. Neither the oceans nor the mountaintops. Neither those around the equator nor the snow-covered parts of the planet. We are all in this together, developed and underdeveloped, providers and recipients of assistance, north and south, big and small. The year 2015 is the turning point in our development history, where we recognize the achievements of the Millennium Development Goals and we chart the road for the next 15 years. We have to be honest about MDGs. A lot has been done, but not all goals have yet been accomplished. This should be a warning and a lesson for our future. Our ambitions must be matched by our determination and ability to deliver. Today, more than ever, we need real leadership. We need people who are not just talking about change, but making change happen. It is not enough just to keep speaking out against the visible and the obvious. It is not enough to be aware or to create a vision of the future. Instead, what we need is people that will get the job done. We are constantly exposed to well-known problems with which we have been coping for many years with limited success. and to new challenges that not so long ago few were able to foresee. Croatia, for example, is suddenly encompassed with the migrant crisis that has been generated far from our borders. And we're not the final destination point of it. But nevertheless, this tide of migrants is leaving a profound impact on my country and the region of Southeast Europe. I will speak in detail about this next week during the general debate, but today I use this as a telling example of how interlinked and interdependent the world has become. Our world is not our own. We owe it to our children. And right now, what are we leaving them? Therefore, we have to approach all 17 goals quickly, coherently, with determination and passion. A lot more is to be lost than could ever be gained back. In Addis Ababa, we reached a groundbreaking agreement on how to generate financing for the sustainable development. This was the first step, and by the end of this week, we shall take another one. But our work is far from being done. The next milestone that awaits us is the Paris Climate Change Conference. Only then, with a successful outcome of that summit, we shall be able to say that in 2015 we truly set the framework for these SDGs. There was no better way to start this day than to listen to the inspirational speech by His Holiness Pope Francis. And there is no better way to crown our summit than to forge our commitment to implement all sustainable development goals by 2030. Rest assured that Croatia will do our part. Let me end with the emphasis on the fifth sustainable development goal, gender equality. As a practical contribution in fulfillment of this pivotal goal is the simple fact that the first speaker in this historic debate of ours is a woman. And Malala, I do promise that every child will have the right to education. I want to keep this global conversation going, but it is not enough just to meet here once a year and maintain our commitments to UN initiatives and national development strategies without taking ownership of problems that are man-made and therefore require us to fix them. Without leadership, there is no way to guarantee that anything can take root and sustain. Anything else less than that is just not enough. Thank you for your kind attention.
I thank the President of Croatia. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Sauli Niinisto, President of the Republic of Finland.
Mr. President, Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. Secretary General, Your Excellencies. It's a great honor for me to address this opening plenary summit that just adopted the new Sustainable Development Agenda. I would like to thank the Secretary General for his relentless work in supporting the achievement of previous goals and setting new ones. I would also like to thank President Museveni and Prime Minister Rasmussen for chairing this historical event. For 15 years, the Millennium Development Goals have inspired us in our pursuit of development. Significant progress has been made in achieving all the goals. Global efforts have helped to lift more than 1 billion people out of extreme poverty, To put this in perspective, it means 200 times the population of my country, Finland, or 27 times that of Uganda. More than 1 billion people have better possibilities today than just 15 years ago. Today, more girls can attend school than ever before. Progress has been made in the fight against hunger and inequality. This work is now continuing. It is also important that the MDGs have kick-started progress where it has been lacking, especially in Africa, where there has been unprecedented economic growth and poverty reduction. Your Excellencies, such progress has not been easy or without setbacks. Not all of the goals have been achieved. While progress has been made in achieving all of the MDGs, more has been achieved in some cases than in others. Gender inequality and violence against women are proving to be intractable challenges. Broad progress towards gender equality has wavered. This is a challenge that we must take seriously. Investing in gender equality is a direct path towards poverty reduction, inclusive growth and prosperity. An ambitious agenda for achieving gender equality and women's rights must be matched by ambitious resources. We simply can't solve the world's problems while keeping half of the population out of leadership positions and subordinated to the other half. To achieve this goal, we need to change the way in which we act and think. Another critical factor besides gender equality that we can't overlook or overcome is environmental sustainability. Addressing climate change and health, food and water provision requires coordinated global monitoring and the modeling of several factors, social, economic and environmental. This also requires an ambitious climate deal in Paris in 2015. Decisions made in Paris will be the world's best last or reaching an agreement on cutting carbon emissions. The changing climate is affecting the livelihoods of hundreds of millions of people. What we have seen in Europe during this autumn is only a sad prelude to what will happen in the future if we fail to achieve environmental sustainability. Your Excellencies, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is a global deal in which each and every one of us is a participant and thereby responsible for ensuring its success. There is no room for disputes or failure. Succeed we must. The alternative is simply too expensive, with too much human suffering and misery on its way. We can choose whether our legacy is one of hope or despair. It is still up to decide. Thank you.
I thank the President of the Republic of Finland for his statement.
The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov, President of Turkmenistan.
Esteemed Mr. President, esteemed Mr. Secretary General, esteemed heads and members of delegations. The present Summit on Sustainable Development is taking place in the year of the 70th anniversary since the establishment of the United Nations organization, which gives it a special significance. 15 years have passed since the world leaders have, for the first time, determined the international agenda in the sphere of development and created an international mechanism of interaction aimed at solving the most pressing issues of the modern time. Today, we can state with confidence that the achievement in implementing the Millennium Development Goals will serve as a solid basis for our joint actions in the coming 15 years. In addition to this, we must achieve the goals that are still incomplete. In this context, the world community of nations needs a new global strategy based on present-day realities and oriented towards long-term prospects. The post-2015 development agenda, presented for approval at the present summit, is indeed a strategy of this kind. Turkmenistan fully supports this document and stands for its adoption. It is our firm belief that the new agenda set out in the 17 global goals and in the 169 sub-goals reflects the main approaches to the solution of development challenges that are facing mankind today. Its main feature is the expressed determination of the international community to achieve sustainable development in a balanced and complex manner in all of its three components: economic, social, and environmental. I am convinced that in view of the above-mentioned factors, precise and coordinated work of the international community in implementing the economic components of sustainable development will facilitate, in many ways, the achievement of such goals as universal access to cheap, reliable, and modern energy supply, stable economic growth and full employment, creation of flexible infrastructure, and promotion of innovation. All of this eventually will enable us to provide sustainable models of production and consumption, and reduce inequalities within and among countries. There is no doubt that achievement of those goals is linked to further improvement of the existing partnership mechanism. In this connection, I believe that it would be advisable to consider at one of the forthcoming meetings of the UN Economic and Social Council the establishment of a new global coordination mechanism for implementing the Sustainable Development Goals Turkmenistan stands ready to submit appropriate, specific proposals. I also believe that in the context of the implementation of development goals, it would be proper to invigorate the work of the UN regional commissions in this regard. Esteemed ladies and gentlemen, one of the main features of the post-2015 agenda is its strong social orientation. It is not accidental that social issues stand at the forefront of the Sustainable Development Goals. Their practical implementation is linked to the enhancement of the effectiveness of targeted and substantive work of UN member states, as well as international structures that are directly responsible for the achievement of global objectives. Thus, it will be necessary to harmonize joint actions of countries with the work of such entities as the United Nations Development Programme, Food and Agricultural Organization, and World Food Organization in order to achieve the goals of eliminating poverty, combating hunger, ensuring food security, and improving nutrition. In this connection, we propose that the 70th session of the General Assembly consider the possibility of convening a high-level food forum. We express our readiness to work with all interested parties to this end. We are ready to work with all parties to achieve this goal. Problems concerning a healthy way of life occupy a most important place among social issues. In this regard, building closer partnerships between UN member states and the World Health Organization and other international organizations will become the foundation for achieving high results in the implementation of Sustainable Development Goals. The new international agenda should include issues of comprehensive, just, and quality education among its top priorities. It is our profound conviction that the United Nations should actively promote the implementation process by developing a broad international dialogue, introducing new national, regional, and global programs in the field of education. Turkmenistan is prepared, in close cooperation with appropriate UN structures, to develop the most active and constructive cooperation in the field of education. We consider UNDP, UNESCO, and UNICEF as our major partners. Gender equality is the key element of the global development strategy. We have set a lofty goal before ourselves, that is, to achieve full gender equality and to empower all women and girls. Fulfillment of this goal is our common duty, and it is our shared responsibility. In this connection, we welcome the initiative of the UN Secretary General, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, to hold a summit of world leaders on gender equality in New York on September 27 this year. Esteemed heads and members of delegations, by adopting the Sustainable Development Goals as a program of our joint efforts for the forthcoming 15 years, we are aware that social and economic development of states and peoples of the planet cannot be achieved without solving the climate change and environment problems. In this context, we welcome the efforts of the United Nations and its Secretary General aimed at finding effective measures for reducing global environmental risks. UN summits and international conferences convened over the past few years have made a substantial contribution to the solution of the problems that relate to the protection of the environment in the world. In early December this year, we will have to adopt important decisions that will have momentous significance for the entire world. At the Conference of the Parties of the Framework Convention on Climate Change, to be held in Paris, Turkmenistan stands ready to support the signing of an international agreement on climate issues and will actively advance this idea during the time left before the conference. Furthermore, I would like to recall that our country officially stated its concept with respect to the strengthening of international environmental cooperation and has submitted a number of specific proposals at various conferences. The initiative regarding the establishment, in cooperation with the United Nations, of a regional climate change center for Central Asian states is among those initiatives. Being committed to the implementation of this idea, Turkmenistan is ready to undertake, together with UNDP, steps in 2016 towards the establishment of this center in Ashgabat. Esteemed Mr. President, esteemed heads and members of delegations, the year 2015 is a special year in the life of Turkmenistan and its people. This year, we mark the 20th anniversary since the adoption of the UN General Assembly resolution on the international recognition of Turkmenistan's permanent neutrality. The past period has most vividly demonstrated the effectiveness of the foreign policy of neutrality pursued by our country and its correspondence to the long-term interests of the international community. This is confirmed by the fact that on June 3, 2015, the General Assembly adopted a new resolution dedicated to Turkmenistan's permanent neutrality. Availing of this opportunity, I would like to express, on behalf of the people of Turkmenistan, our profound gratitude to all member states of the UN for the firm and unwavering support of our country's neutral status. An international forum dedicated to the issues of neutrality, peace, and development will be held in the capital of Turkmenistan, the city of Ashgabat, on December 12, 2015. Allow me to renew from this high podium an invitation to the heads of states or governments of UN member states to visit our country during this period and to take part in the celebrations on the occasion of Turkmenistan's permanent neutrality. In conclusion, I would like to especially emphasize that Turkmenistan will continue to develop close international cooperation in the name of upholding the lofty ideals of peace and justice and fulfillment of the goals and purposes of the United Nations organization. Thank you very much.
I thank the President of Turkmenistan for his statement, and if you will allow me once again to remind you as colleagues and esteemed delegates that in accordance with Resolution 69/244 of 29 December 2014, the list of speakers was created on the basis that statements will have a time limit of up to 5 minutes.
Well, I want to reinforce the statement of the co-chair about the 5 minutes rule. If all the members, all the people on the list are to speak, but we don't have sanctions. Should be some means of implementation. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Juan Manuel Santos Calderon, President of the Republic of Colombia.
And that was the President of Turkmenistan who spoke beyond his given time limit. And this is just a prelude to what's to come. The heads of state share their brief statements on what to be discussed later on. And tomorrow we will bring you the live coverage of President Park Geun-hye, South Korean President Park Geun-hye, for a speech at the very same event at the UN General Assembly. This was our live coverage of the UN Sustainable Development Summit. They shared the UN Agenda 2030. Many big names from around the world, the UN member nations, came together to share how they would work towards realizing the 17 goals for the UN Agenda 2030. We will bring you the live coverage of the ongoing event later on, but of course we have to come to the end of this coverage. We thank you for watching, and we will have our regularly scheduled newscast follow suit. Thank you again.